Hi everyone, welcome to the third and final lecture for chapter 10. Just to refresh your memory, we have been talking about two-way ANOVAs, and specifically we have focused on the two-way independent ANOVA. Of course, there's two more, and that is the two-way repeated ANOVA and the two-way mixed ANOVA, which is what we are going to do today. But first, I want to talk about something that I call the pecking hierarchy. You've heard of, birds and animals having a pecking order. Well, there's kind of the same thing when we look at two-way ANOVAs, because remember that every two-way ANOVA yields three different effects that you can test. You can test the the main effect of factor A, the main effect of factor B, and the interaction between the two. All right, so two main effects and an interaction effect get tested in every two-way ANOVA. Well, among those three effects, there is a pecking order in terms of which one are you going to focus on the most. And it depends on a number of things. Well, it depends on two things. One is which effects are significant, because certainly you wouldn't focus your attention on non-significant effects. So that's one thing. But the other thing is whether or not the effect you're looking at is part of an effect that is considered higher order. Okay, so that's what this says. In factorial ANOVAs, so it's not just two ways, it can be three ways, four ways, five ways. It says, do not further analyze a significant effect if it is part of a higher order effect that is significant. So let me run through a few examples so that you can better understand what it is I'm trying to say. So here are the three effects in a two-way ANOVA. And let's just pretend for this, demonstration that factor A, main effect of factor A, is significant, main of factor B is not, and the interaction AB is significant. All right. Now, first of all, we would never follow up on this. Like, we wouldn't do post hoc tests or anything. We would say that the main effect of B is not significant, and then, we would move on. We would say, whatever factor B is probably has no effect on the dependent variable. So we wouldn't normally follow up on factor B anyways. But what about factor A? What if, let's say, factor A has three or more levels? Well, normally you would say, okay, I got to do a post hoc test on that because I don't know which mean is different from which, right? If there's three or more. But before you do any post hoc tests, if they are necessary, you first need to see, is A, factor A, part of a higher order interaction effect? And so what we do is we look down here and we can see, yes, it is. So in other words, the more letters you have in the interactions, the higher order it's considered to be. So AB is higher order than B and A. A only has, we're only looking at one factor here. Here we're looking at one factor. Here we're looking at two factors. So it has more factors being analyzed. It's considered higher order. Again, even though A is significant, then instead of following up with post hoc tests, which you would normally do, remember, if you have three or more means. If you only have two means for A, you don't need to follow up because you know where the difference is. But if A had three or more levels, you still would not follow it up with post hoc because A is a part of this higher order effect. So what would you do with this? Well, you learned last class that when you have a significant interaction, the next step is to do tests of simple main effects. All right. And then once you do those tests of simple main effects, some of them, depending if they're significant, you might need to do more post hoc tests. It just depends on when you do those tests of simple main effects, if A, they're significant, and B, does that effect have three or more means? So there are some really important rules that you have to remember here. Let me just take a second and highlight those important rules, okay? Because it is pretty critical that you understand these. So first of all, if you have a main effect that is significant, do you follow it up with a post hoc test? Well, if that significant main effect has 3 or more means, yes, you do. All right? Unless, we've just learned, unless that significant main effect is part of a higher order significant effect, right? So then you would not go on to further analyze the main effect of A. All right, what do you do when you have a significant interaction effect? You do tests of simple main effects. Once you do those tests of simple main effects, it's possible you might have to run Tukey, Chaffee, LSDT, or pairwise comparisons. It just depends on how many means are being compared in that test of simple main effect. We are going to review these rules today when we look at the two-way repeated ANOVA and the two-way mixed ANOVA. All right? All right, let's try something a little more challenging. These would be all the effects tested in a three-way ANOVA. So just by adding a third factor, a third independent variable, we now have 7 effects that can be tested. All right, so you're going to end up generating 7 F ratios. So what are they? Well, with 3 factors, let's just call them A, B, and C. We have a main effect of factor A, a main effect of factor B, main effect of factor C, the interaction between AB, the interaction between AC, interaction between BC, and interaction between ABC. Okay, that pretty much covers all your bases. Which one is considered the highest order? It would be this one down here, all right, because it includes all 3 factors. Next on the pecking list, these 3, we call them two-way interactions. See, this is called a three-way interaction. BC, AC, and BC, AC, and AB are called two-way interactions, and these would be next on the totem pole. Okay, so ABC is the highest, followed by these two-way interactions, and these lonely fellows here are at the bottom of the totem pole, okay, the bottom of the pecking order. Okay, now we have to figure out which ones are we going to further analyze. Well, first of all, you should easily pick out which ones you are not going to analyze because they are not significant. So we would tell people that the effect is not significant, but in no way would we follow it up, let's say, with post hoc tests or tests of simple main effects because it's not significant. So we just tell people, for example, main effect of factor B was not significant, which means that whatever factor B is, it probably has no effect on our dependent variable. You would do the same thing for AC, BC, and ABC. So you would tell people that these interactions were not significant, which probably means that the treatment combinations of whatever factor A and C are, or whichever one you're looking at, the treatment combinations between the two had no effect on the dependent variable. No differential effect on the dependent variable. There could be differences between the cells, but it means that the pattern was the same throughout. So there was no differential effect through the combination of both A and B. Another way of saying it, let's look at AB, would be to say whatever effect factor A was having, it was the same for each level of B. Over here, I'm sorry, that was significant. Scratch that. Okay, we're going to come back to this. That was significant. I didn't notice. Okay, let's look here. Whatever effect A was having, it was the same for each level of C. whatever effect B was having, it was the same for each level of C. This one, it gets more complicated, and I think I'm giving you enough. If you go to graduate school, or if you want to know, then I'll tell you how to interpret this one, okay? But you should be able to interpret a two-way interaction, okay? All right, so we know we're not going to follow up. We're just going to tell people that these were not significant, and you're going to use the wording that I just suggested, okay? So again, A was the effective factor A was the same for each level of C, and then this is interpreted the same way. Factor B, again, you just say it's not significant. Whatever effect factor B was having, it was the same for all levels. Now we have to figure out, okay, among our significant effects, which are these three, which one are we going to further analyze and interpret? So we go up here and we look at factor A. Now, if A had 3 or more levels, normally you would do a post hoc test, right? Excuse me. Normally you would do a post hoc test. But before you do, now you know you have to look down to see if it's part of a higher order effect that's significant. And AB is a higher order effect, and it is significant, so you do not further analyze A. You just say A was significant, but will not be further analyzed here because the interaction between A and B is significant. All right, so you're going to focus on this. This higher order effect is going to tell you much more than the effect of factor A alone on the dependent variable. So because this gives you so much more information than just this, that explains why we don't go on to further analyze A, even though it's significant. All right, what's the next one? The next significant effect is C. All right, before you go on and decide if you need to do post hoc tests, you need to check and see, is factor C part of a higher order effect that is significant? So we look at C, and then we look for higher order effects that are significant, and there's only one. This is the only other higher order effect that is significant. Is C a part of it? No. So that means that if you need to run post hoc tests on C because it has 3 or more levels, you should do it. Okay, we're not going to ignore this main effect now because it's not part of a higher order effect that is significant. Now, I've given you a lot of information here. It would be very, very helpful if you were to write out these rules. All right, because hearing me speak, it's easy to go, what? But when you actually write it out and kind of analyze what you've just written, you are going to see the logic, I think, in what I just said. All right? Of course, it also means that you might pick out an inconsistency in which I just said, like something I contradicted myself. If that's the case, please let me know. All right? Because sometimes... hopefully it doesn't happen often, but we'll see.